Dr. Rebecca Martinez had always believed that hard work would speak for itself. At 31, she was one of the youngest tenured professors at Westfield University, teaching advanced physics to undergraduate and graduate students. Her office walls were covered with awards, certificates, and photos of her with students at graduation ceremonies. The small coffee mug on her desk read, "World's Okayest Professor," a gift from her husband that always made her smile during long grading sessions. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Rebecca walked across campus, her 7-month pregnant belly making her usual brisk pace a bit slower. Students waved at her from the quad, and she waved back, stopping to chat with a few who had questions about their upcoming exams. This was what she loved most about teaching, seeing that moment when a difficult concept suddenly clicked for someone. Her first class of the day was Introduction to Quantum Physics, a subject that intimidated most students. But Rebecca had a gift for breaking down complex ideas into simple terms. She'd use everyday objects to explain particle behavior, making jokes about how electrons were like teenagers. You never knew exactly where they were or what they were doing. "Professor Martinez," called out Tyler, one of her brightest students as she entered the lecture hall, "my mom wanted me to congratulate you on the baby. She says you're brave for still teaching this late in pregnancy." Rebecca laughed, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "Your mom is sweet, but honestly, I feel great. This little one seems to love physics lectures. They kick every time I get excited about quantum entanglement." The class erupted in gentle laughter. This was the atmosphere Rebecca had cultivated over her 8 years at Westfield, respectful, engaging, and warm. She believed that students learned better when they felt comfortable asking questions and making mistakes. As she began her lecture on wave-particle duality, Rebecca noticed how attentive her students were. Even Jake, who usually dozed off in the back row, was taking notes. She used the analogy of light being like a person who could be both an athlete and an artist, showing different sides depending on how you looked at them. "It's not that light sometimes acts like a wave and sometimes like a particle," she explained, gesturing with her hands. "It's that light is both things all the time. We just see different aspects depending on how we observe it." A student raised her hand. "Professor, does that mean reality changes based on how we look at it?" Rebecca smiled. This was exactly the kind of question that made teaching worthwhile. "That's one of the most beautiful mysteries of physics, Amanda. Some physicists think observation does change reality. Others believe reality exists independently, and we're just limited in how much we can see at once. What do you think?" The discussion that followed was exactly why Rebecca had chosen academia over the private sector job offers she'd received after graduate school. Yes, she could have made more money working for a tech company, but where else could she spend her days exploring the fundamental nature of reality with bright young minds? After class, Rebecca walked to her lab where 3 graduate students were working on their research projects. The lab was her pride and joy. Equipment worth over $500,000 that she'd helped secure through grant applications. Her research on quantum computing applications had attracted national attention, and she'd been invited to speak at conferences around the world. "Dr. Martinez," said Chen, one of her graduate students, looking up from a complex equation on the whiteboard, "I think I found an error in the calculation from yesterday." "Show me," Rebecca said, settling into a chair carefully. These days, standing for long periods made her back ache. As they worked through the math together, Rebecca felt a familiar sense of satisfaction. This was more than just solving problems. They were pushing the boundaries of human knowledge, one calculation at a time. Her research could potentially lead to computers that were millions of times faster than anything that existed today. Around noon, Rebecca made her way to the faculty lounge for lunch. The room buzzed with the usual conversations about research, upcoming conferences, and university politics. She grabbed a sandwich and sat with Dr. Patricia Williams from the English department, one of her closest friends on campus. "How are you feeling?" Patricia asked, eyeing Rebecca's growing belly with concern. "You look tired," Rebecca shrugged. "The usual pregnancy stuff. Back pain, trouble sleeping. But overall, I'm good. The baby's healthy and I love what I'm doing. I figure I'll work until the very end and then take a few months off. Have you thought about what happens when you come back?" Patricia lowered her voice. "I mean, with childcare and everything?" "Tom and I have it figured out," Rebecca said, referring to her husband. "He teaches high school, so his schedule is more flexible than mine. and my mom lives 20 minutes away. We'll make it work." Patricia nodded, but something in her expression made Rebecca pause. "What is it?" "Oh, nothing specific," Patricia said quickly. "I just know some departments can be challenging when it comes to faculty with young children, especially women." Rebecca frowned. "This is 2024, Patricia. Surely we've moved past those attitudes." "I hope so," Patricia said, but she didn't sound entirely convinced. That afternoon, Rebecca had office hours. Students streamed in with questions about homework, career advice, and graduate school applications. One young woman, Lisa, stayed after the others had left. "Professor Martinez," Lisa began hesitantly, "I wanted to ask you something personal. Is it okay to be ambitious and want a family at the same time?" Rebecca leaned back in her chair, touched by the question. "Lisa, some of the most brilliant scientists I know are also mothers. Marie Curie won 2 Nobel Prizes and raised 2 daughters. Lise Meitner, Dorothy Hodgkin, Barbara McClintock, they all balanced scientific careers with rich personal lives in their own ways. But wasn't it harder for them?" "Of course it was harder," Rebecca admitted. "But that doesn't mean it wasn't worth it. And things are better now than they were 50 years ago. Universities have better policies, more support systems. It's not easy, but it's definitely possible." Lisa smiled, looking relieved. "Thank you. You're kind of my role model, you know. Seeing you do both gives me hope." After Lisa left, Rebecca sat in her office as the late afternoon sun streamed through her windows. She thought about the conversation with Patricia, and a small worry crept into her mind. Surely Westfield University, with its progressive reputation and diversity initiatives, wouldn't be the kind of place where having a baby would hurt her career. She looked at the photo on her desk of her and Tom on their wedding day 3 years ago. He'd been nothing but supportive of her career, even when it meant long hours in the lab or travel to conferences. When they decided to start a family, they'd talked extensively about how to balance 2 careers with parenting. Rebecca placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. In 2 months, their lives would change completely, but she was confident they could handle it. After all, she'd overcome every challenge life had thrown at her so far. She'd been the first in her family to attend college, worked her way through graduate school, and earned her position through pure merit and determination. As she packed up her things to go home, Rebecca felt optimistic about the future. She had tenure, which meant job security. She had a husband who supported her dreams. She had students who respected her, and colleagues who valued her contributions. What could possibly go wrong? Walking across campus toward the parking lot, Rebecca waved goodbye to the maintenance staff and nodded to other faculty members heading home. The university felt like a second home to her, a place where intellect was valued and hard work was rewarded. She'd spent the best years of her life here, building something meaningful. Tomorrow would bring new classes, new research challenges, and new opportunities to make a difference. Rebecca climbed into her car, already looking forward to the next day. She had no way of knowing that everything she'd worked for was about to be put to the ultimate test. The faculty meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 3 o'clock, and Rebecca arrived 5 minutes early as she always did. The conference room was already half full, with professors from various departments settling into their chairs with coffee cups and notebooks. She chose her usual seat near the middle of the long oak table, close enough to see the presentation screen clearly, but not so close as to appear overeager. Dr. Harrison Beck, the head of the physics department, called the meeting to order with his typical no-nonsense approach. Rebecca had always respected Dr. Beck. He was in his late 50s, had been with the university for over 20 years, and had a reputation for being fair and straightforward. When she'd been up for tenure 3 years ago, he'd been one of her strongest supporters. "We need to discuss the budget allocations for next year," Dr. Beck began, clicking through slides on his laptop. "As you all know, the university is facing some financial pressures, and we need to make some difficult decisions about research funding." Rebecca listened carefully as he outlined various budget cuts and reallocations. This was standard stuff. Every department went through this process annually. She wasn't particularly worried about her own funding, since her quantum computing research had been bringing in substantial grants from both government and private sources. "Now," Dr. Beck continued, "we need to address faculty availability and research productivity for the upcoming year." He paused, and Rebecca noticed his eyes briefly glance in her direction. We have several faculty members who will be taking extended leave, and we need to ensure continuity in our research programs. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the Theoretical Physics Group raised her hand. Are you talking about sabbaticals? Because those are planned well in advance. Not exactly, Dr. Beck replied, and this time his gaze lingered on Rebecca for a moment longer. I'm referring to other types of extended absences that might impact our department's research output and grant funding. Rebecca felt a small knot form in her stomach. Was he talking about her maternity leave? She'd submitted the paperwork months ago, following all the proper procedures. The university's policy clearly stated that faculty were entitled to 12 weeks of maternity leave, and she'd planned to take 8 weeks, returning when the baby was 2 months old. Dr. Beck clicked to the next slide, which showed a breakdown of active research grants by faculty member. Rebecca's name was at the top of the list. Her quantum computing project had received a 3-year, $1.2 million grant from the National Science Foundation just 6 months ago. As you can see, Dr. Beck said, we have significant resources invested in various research projects. However, we need to consider the practical implications when principal investigators are unavailable for extended periods. Dr. Williams, a senior professor who'd been with the department for 15 years, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Harrison, are you suggesting we should redistribute active grants? Because that's a very serious step that could damage our relationships with funding agencies. I'm not suggesting anything definitive yet, Dr. Beck replied. I'm simply raising the issue for discussion. We need to be proactive about ensuring our research commitments are met. Rebecca felt her cheeks flush. She cleared her throat and spoke up. Dr. Beck, if this is about my upcoming maternity leave, I should point out that I've already made arrangements with my graduate students and research collaborators. Dr. Thompson from MIT has agreed to serve as interim supervisor for any critical experiments, and my students are well trained to continue the day-to-day work. The room fell silent. Several faculty members looked uncomfortable, staring down at their notebooks or coffee cups. Dr. Beck's expression remained neutral, but Rebecca could sense tension in the air. Dr. Martinez, he said formally, using her title rather than her first name as he usually did, this isn't specifically about any one person. We're discussing general departmental policies for situations where faculty availability might be compromised. But Rebecca knew better. The timing, the pointed glances, the emphasis on extended absences. This was absolutely about her pregnancy and upcoming maternity leave. She felt a surge of anger, but forced herself to remain calm and professional. I understand the department's concerns about continuity, she said carefully, but I want to assure everyone that my research will continue uninterrupted. In fact, many of my most productive insights have come during periods when I've had time to think deeply about problems without the distractions of daily lab management. Dr. Beck nodded curtly. We'll table this discussion for now and revisit it at our next meeting. Moving on to the next agenda item. But Rebecca could barely focus on the rest of the meeting. Her mind raced as she tried to process what had just happened. Was her department head really questioning her commitment and productivity because she was having a baby? This was exactly the kind of discrimination that was supposed to be illegal. After the meeting ended, Rebecca lingered as other faculty members filed out. She wanted to speak with Dr. Beck privately, but he was already deep in conversation with Dr. Walsh about budget numbers. As she walked toward the door, she overheard Dr. Stevens from the Experimental Physics Group talking quietly to a colleague. It's a legitimate concern, he was saying. Research grants have deadlines and deliverables. If someone can't fulfill their obligations... But she's having a baby, not disappearing forever, the other professor replied. Women have been balancing careers and families for decades. I'm just saying the department has to protect its interests, Dr. Stevens continued. We can't afford to have grants pulled because of missed deadlines. Rebecca felt sick to her stomach. These were her colleagues, people she'd worked alongside for years, and they were discussing her as if she were a liability, rather than a valued member of the team. That evening, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table, pushing food around on her plate without much appetite. Tom watched her with concern from across the small dining room. You've barely said 10 words since you got home, he said gently. What happened today? Rebecca told him about the faculty meeting, choosing her words carefully but unable to hide her frustration and hurt. Tom's expression grew increasingly angry as she spoke. "That's completely unacceptable," he said when she finished. "You've been one of their most productive faculty members for years. Your research brings in more money than half the department combined." "I know," Rebecca said quietly, "but I can't shake the feeling that things are going to get worse before they get better." Tom reached across the table and took her hand. "Maybe you should talk to someone in human resources. Or the faculty union. There have to be policies protecting pregnant employees." Rebecca nodded, but part of her hoped the meeting had just been an awkward moment that would blow over. Surely Dr. Beck wasn't seriously considering interfering with her research funding. Surely her colleagues would support her when it really mattered. The next morning, Rebecca arrived at her office to find an email waiting for her from the university's research administration office. Her heart sank as she read the message requesting a meeting to discuss the continuity plan for NSF. Grant 2240847, her quantum computing project. She immediately called the research office. The administrator, Ms. Rodriguez, was polite but firm. "Dr. Martinez, this is just a routine check-in," she explained. "With your upcoming leave, we need to ensure all grant requirements will be met. The NSF has been quite strict lately about project timelines." "But I submitted a detailed continuation plan 3 months ago," Rebecca protested. "Everything was approved." "I understand, but Dr. Beck has raised some additional concerns. Could you come in this afternoon at 2? Rebecca agreed, but as she hung up the phone, her hands were shaking slightly. This was escalating beyond what she'd expected. She spent the morning reviewing all her grant documentation, making sure every detail was in order. The meeting that afternoon was even more troubling than she'd anticipated. In addition to Ms. Rodriguez, Dr. Beck was there, along with the university's legal counsel, a serious-looking woman named Ms. Patterson. "Dr. Martinez," Ms. Patterson began, "we want to ensure that all parties understand their obligations under the terms of your research grants. Given your upcoming extended absence—" "8 weeks is hardly extended," Rebecca interrupted. "It's less time than a typical summer break." Dr. Beck leaned forward. "Rebecca, we're not questioning your right to take maternity leave. We're simply being prudent about our obligations to funding agencies. If there's any disruption to the research timeline—" "There won't be," Rebecca said firmly. "I've coordinated with my collaborators, my graduate students are fully briefed, and I'll be available for consultation throughout my leave." But she could see in their faces that they'd already made up their minds about something. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with lots of discussion about contingency plans and risk mitigation, but Rebecca left feeling like she'd been put on trial for the crime of being pregnant. Walking back to her office, she noticed that conversations seemed to stop as she passed groups of colleagues in the hallway. Dr. Stevens nodded politely but didn't make his usual small talk about weekend plans. Dr. Walsh, who normally stopped by her office several times a week to discuss research ideas, hadn't visited in 3 days that evening. Rebecca called her mentor from graduate school, Dr. Angela Foster, who now worked at a prestigious research institute in California. "Angela," Rebecca said after explaining the situation, "am I overreacting? Is this normal?" There was a long pause before Dr. Foster responded. "Rebecca, I wish I could tell you this was unusual, but unfortunately it's not. I've seen brilliant women pushed out of academia, or at least pushed to the sidelines because institutions panic when they think about pregnancy and childcare. But what can I do? I can't exactly unpregnant myself." Dr. Foster's laugh was bitter. "You document everything, every conversation, every email, every meeting, and you start thinking about your options because this kind of thing rarely gets better on its own." That night, Rebecca lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the baby's movements as her mind raced. She'd worked so hard to get where she was. 14 years of education after high school, countless hours in labs, conferences, grant applications, peer reviews. She'd followed every rule, exceeded every expectation, and earned her place through merit and determination. Now it felt like all of that could be swept away simply because she'd chosen to have a family. The worst part wasn't even the professional implications. It was the betrayal by people she'd considered friends and allies. These were educated, progressive people who would never openly admit to gender discrimination, yet here they were, treating her pregnancy as a professional liability. As dawn broke through their bedroom window, Rebecca made a decision. She wasn't going to let this slide. If her colleagues wanted to question her commitment and productivity, she'd show them exactly what they were dealing with. And if they continued down this path, she'd make sure they understood the consequences of underestimating her. Monday morning brought an email that made Rebecca's coffee turn cold in her hands. Dr. Beck was requesting an urgent meeting about her research, lab access during her upcoming leave. The message was formal, almost cold, nothing like the friendly communications she'd received from him over the years. Rebecca walked across campus to the physics building with a growing sense of dread. The November air was crisp and fallen leaves crunched under her feet as she made her way to Dr. Beck's office. Students hurried past her, bundled in jackets and scarves, chatting about upcoming exams and holiday plans. Their carefree energy felt like it belonged to a different world. Dr. Beck's office door was open, but he wasn't alone. Ms. Patterson, the university's legal counsel, sat across from his desk with a manila folder in her lap. Rebecca knocked on the doorframe. "Come in, Dr. Martinez," Dr. Beck said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Please have a seat." Rebecca settled into the chair carefully, her 8-month belly making even simple movements more challenging these days. She'd started her maternity leave planning process early, specifically to avoid any last-minute complications, but clearly that strategy hadn't worked. "We've been reviewing the protocols for lab access during faculty absences," Ms. Patterson began, opening her folder. "There are some security and insurance concerns we need to address." Rebecca frowned. "I'm not sure I understand. My graduate students have been working in the lab independently for over a year. They all have proper clearances and training certifications." Dr. Beck cleared his throat. "The issue isn't their qualifications, Rebecca. It's about supervision and liability. University policy requires that all research activities involving federal grants have direct faculty oversight. But that's exactly why I arranged for Dr. Thompson to serve as interim supervisor," Rebecca said, feeling her frustration rise. "He's a tenured professor with 30 years of experience in quantum systems." "Dr. Thompson is at MIT," Ms. Patterson pointed out. "He can't provide the daily oversight that university policy requires for on-site research activities." Rebecca stared at them both, trying to process what she was hearing. "Are you saying my students can't use the lab while I'm on maternity leave?" "We're saying we need to temporarily reassign direct supervision of the lab to a faculty member who can be physically present," Dr. Beck said. "Dr. Stevens has agreed to oversee the space and equipment during your absence." The name hit Rebecca like a cold wave. Dr. Stevens, who she'd overheard questioning her commitment just days earlier. Dr. Stevens, whose own research was in a completely different area of physics. Dr. Stevens, who had never shown any interest in quantum computing before now. "Dr. Stevens works in particle physics," Rebecca said slowly. "He has no background in quantum computing systems. How can he possibly supervise my research?" "He doesn't need to understand the specifics," Ms. Patterson replied. "He just needs to ensure that university policies are followed and that all activities comply with grant requirements." Rebecca felt like she was falling down a rabbit hole. "This is absurd. My research will basically stop if my students can't access the equipment, and Dr. Stevens won't have any idea what they're working on or whether they're making progress." Dr. Beck leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Rebecca, this is a temporary arrangement. When you return from leave, everything will go back to normal." "Will it?" Rebecca asked sharply. "Because it sounds like you're creating a situation where my research will fail, which will then justify reallocating my grant funding." The silence that followed was deafening. Ms. Patterson made a note in her file, while Dr. Beck stared out his window at the campus quad. "Dr. Martinez," Ms. Patterson finally said, "I think you're reading too much into this. We're simply following university protocols to protect everyone's interests." Rebecca left the meeting feeling like she'd been punched in the stomach. She walked slowly back to her office, her mind racing through the implications. Without lab access, her graduate students couldn't continue their experiments. Without progress on the experiments, they'd miss the deadlines outlined in her grant proposal. Without meeting grant deadlines, the funding could be pulled and redistributed. It was a perfect trap, designed to look like standard bureaucratic procedure, while systematically dismantling everything she'd worked to build. That afternoon, Rebecca met with her 3 graduate students, Alex, Maria, and David, to explain the situation. Their reactions ranged from confusion to outrage. "This is completely insane. Alex said, pacing around the small conference room. I'm 6 months away from defending my dissertation. I can't afford to lose access to the lab now. Maria, who was quieter by nature, looked close to tears. Professor Martinez, is this because you're having a baby? Because that seems really unfair. David, the oldest of the three and typically the most diplomatic, was unusually blunt. With all due respect, Professor, this feels like discrimination. Have you considered filing a complaint? Rebecca had been considering exactly that, but she'd also been hoping the situation might resolve itself without the need for formal action. Now it was clear that hope had been naive. I want you all to know that I'm going to fight this, she told them. But in the meantime, we need to figure out how to protect your research and your academic progress. Over the next few days, word of the lab situation spread through the physics department like wildfire. Rebecca's colleagues' reactions revealed more about their true feelings than she'd expected. Dr. Williams stopped by her office to express sympathy, but quickly changed the subject when Rebecca asked if he'd be willing to serve as an interim supervisor himself. Dr. Walsh was more direct. Rebecca, maybe you should consider that the department is just trying to protect itself. Research funding is competitive and we can't afford to lose grants because of personal situations. Personal situations. That's how her colleagues were now referring to her pregnancy. Not as a normal life event that millions of working women navigated successfully, but as a personal situation that threatened the department's interests. The breaking point came on Thursday afternoon. Rebecca arrived at her lab to find Dr. Stevens inside, examining her equipment with a clipboard in hand. Her graduate student stood awkwardly nearby, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Dr. Stevens, Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice level. What are you doing here? He looked up from the quantum computer interface, unfazed by her obvious displeasure. Just familiarizing myself with the setup. Impressive equipment. Very expensive. Yes, it is expensive, Rebecca replied. It's also extremely sensitive and calibrated for specific experiments. Any changes to the settings could set our research back by months. Dr. Stevens made a note on his clipboard. I'm sure your students can explain the procedures to me. How complicated can it be? Maria stepped forward, her usual shyness overcome by protective instinct for their research. Professor Stevens, this system requires years of training to operate safely. The quantum states we're working with are incredibly fragile. I'm sure I'll figure it out, Dr. Stevens said dismissively. After all, physics is physics. Rebecca watched this exchange with growing horror. This wasn't just bureaucratic oversight. This was a complete takeover of her research by someone who had no understanding of what they were dealing with. It was like asking a car mechanic to perform brain surgery because they both involved tools. That evening, Rebecca sat in her home office, surrounded by printouts of university policies, employment law articles, and contact information for various advocacy organizations. Tom brought her a cup of tea and sat down across from her. Have you decided what you're going to do? He asked gently. Rebecca looked up from the papers scattered across her desk. I'm going to document everything like Angela suggested, and I'm going to file a formal complaint with the university's Equal Opportunity Office. And if that doesn't work? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting on her belly. The baby was due in just 4 weeks, and she'd originally planned to work right up until her due date. Now she was facing the possibility that her career might be over before her child was even born. If that doesn't work, she said finally, then I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what happened here. The physics community is smaller than most people realize. Word travels fast. Tom nodded, understanding the implication. Rebecca's reputation in her field was stellar. She'd been invited to speak at international conferences. Her research was cited regularly in prestigious journals, and she had connections at universities around the world. If Westfield University wanted to play hardball, they might find themselves facing consequences they hadn't anticipated. Over the weekend, Rebecca drafted her formal complaint to the Equal Opportunity Office. She outlined every meeting, every email, every conversation that had contributed to the hostile environment she was now facing. She attached documentation showing her exemplary performance record, her grant funding history, and the detailed continuity plans she'd submitted months earlier. The complaint was 10 pages long by the time she finished, and reading through it made her feel sick. She'd never imagined she'd have to defend her right to have a baby while maintaining her career. She'd thought those battles had been fought and won by previous generations of women. On Monday morning, Rebecca submitted her complaint and requested a meeting with the Equal Opportunity Office. The response came back within hours. They could schedule a preliminary discussion for the following week. Meanwhile, her situation in the physics department continued to deteriorate. Dr. Stevens had begun requiring her graduate students to submit daily reports on their activities, effectively micromanaging research he didn't understand. Alex had already started looking into transferring to other universities. Maria was having anxiety attacks about the future of her dissertation research. By Wednesday, Rebecca had made a decision that surprised even herself. She called Dr. Foster in California and asked a simple question. "If I wanted to explore other options, what would you recommend?" The conversation that followed opened Rebecca's eyes to possibilities she'd never seriously considered. Dr. Foster mentioned several universities with strong quantum computing programs that were actively recruiting faculty. She talked about research institutes with better funding and more supportive environments for working parents. "Rebecca," Dr. Foster said toward the end of their call, "you're one of the brightest people I've ever mentored. You don't have to put up with this treatment. There are places that would value your work and respect your choices." That evening, Rebecca and Tom had a long conversation about their future. They talked about the possibility of relocating, about the challenges of moving with a newborn, about the professional opportunities that might be available elsewhere. "The question is," Tom said as they sat on their couch, "do you want to fight to stay here, or do you want to find somewhere that actually deserves you?" Rebecca looked around their small living room, thinking about the life they'd built in this college town. They had friends here, a community, a home they loved, but she also thought about her graduate students, about the research that was being threatened, about the colleagues who had revealed their true colors over the past few weeks. "Maybe," she said slowly, "it's time to show them exactly what they're about to lose." As if responding to her words, the baby kicked strongly against her ribs as if agreeing with her decision. Rebecca smiled for the first time in days. Her child was going to be born into a world where their mother didn't back down from a fight, where principles mattered more than convenience. The next phase of this battle was about to begin, and Rebecca was ready for it. The December faculty meeting was supposed to be routine, a final review of the semester before winter break. Rebecca arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a leather portfolio that contained far more than just meeting notes. She'd spent the past 2 weeks preparing for this moment, and today would determine the trajectory of her entire career. The conference room gradually filled with familiar faces. Dr. Beck sat at the head of the table, shuffling through his papers with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. Dr. Stevens occupied a chair near the middle, looking more confident than Rebecca had ever seen him. Other faculty members filtered in, most avoiding eye contact with her while exchanging pleasantries about holiday plans and semester wrap-ups. Rebecca chose a seat with a clear view of everyone in the room. At 36 weeks pregnant, she moved carefully, but her mind was razor-sharp. She'd been documenting everything for weeks now, and the picture that had emerged was damning. "Let's begin," Dr. Beck announced once everyone was seated. "Our final agenda item today is the redistribution of research resources for the spring semester." Rebecca's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment she'd been anticipating and dreading in equal measure. Dr. Beck clicked to a PowerPoint slide showing current grant allocations. Rebecca's quantum computing project was highlighted in red, marked as under review. "As you all know," Dr. Beck continued, "we've had some challenges with faculty availability that have affected our research continuity. After careful consideration, we've decided to temporarily reallocate the NSF Quantum Computing Grant to ensure project deliverables are met on schedule." Dr. Stevens straightened in his chair, clearly knowing what was coming next. "Dr. Stevens has graciously agreed to serve as the primary investigator for this project during the transitional period," Dr. Beck announced. "This will ensure that our obligations to the National Science Foundation are fulfilled without interruption." The room was silent, except for the hum of the overhead lights. Rebecca felt the baby kick strongly, as if responding to her elevated heart rate. She looked around the table at her colleagues, people she'd worked alongside for years, people she'd considered friends. Most were staring at their notebooks or phones, unable to meet her eyes. Dr. Walsh finally broke the silence. "Harrison, this seems like a significant step. Has Dr. Martinez agreed to this arrangement?" Dr. Beck glanced at Rebecca briefly. Dr. Martinez has been consulted throughout this process. This decision is in the best interests of the department and the university. Rebecca stood up slowly, her hands resting on the table for support. Every head in the room turned toward her. She'd rehearsed this moment countless times over the past week, but now that it was here, she felt surprisingly calm. Actually, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room, I haven't agreed to anything, and I have quite a lot to say about what's been happening here. Dr. Beck looked uncomfortable. Rebecca, perhaps we should discuss this privately after the meeting. No, Rebecca said firmly. I think everyone here should hear this since you've all been part of it. She opened her leather portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Several faculty members shifted nervously in their seats. 8 years ago, Rebecca began, I was hired by this department because of my potential. You told me that Westfield University valued innovation, collaboration, and excellence. I believed you. She pulled out the first document from her stack. Since then, I've published 47 peer-reviewed papers. I've brought in over $2.8 million in research funding. I've mentored 12 graduate students, 10 of whom have gone on to prestigious positions in academia and industry. Rebecca placed the document on the table where everyone could see it, a summary of her academic achievements that she'd compiled the night before. I've won the department's Teaching Excellence Award 3 times. I've served on university committees, reviewed papers for major journals, and represented Westfield at international conferences. My research on quantum computing has been featured in Science magazine and Nature Physics. She pulled out another document, a list of her publications and awards. Dr. Stevens was staring at his hands, while Dr. Beck's face had gone pale. But apparently, Rebecca continued, her voice growing stronger, none of that matters because I'm having a baby. The silence in the room was deafening. Rebecca could hear her own heartbeat as she continued. For the past month, you've systematically undermined my research, questioned my commitment, and created barriers that don't exist for any other faculty member. You've done this while pretending it's about university policy and research continuity. She placed another document on the table, printouts of university policies showing that other faculty members had taken extended leave without any interference with their research. Funding. Dr. Williams took a 6-month sabbatical last year to write his book. Did anyone question his grant funding? Dr. Walsh spent 4 months in Europe on a research collaboration. Did anyone suggest redistributing her resources? Several faculty members were now looking decidedly uncomfortable. Dr. Williams was staring out the window, while Dr. Walsh had gone red in the face. But when I, a pregnant woman, need 8 weeks of maternity leave with a complete continuity plan in place, suddenly it's a crisis that requires taking away my research funding and handing it to someone with no background in quantum computing. Rebecca pulled out her phone and placed it on the table. I've documented every conversation, every email, every meeting. I have recordings of Dr. Stevens saying that pregnant faculty are a liability to the department. I have written evidence of attempts to restrict my lab access in ways that violate university policy. Dr. Beck started to speak, but Rebecca held up her hand. I'm not finished, she said, because here's what you don't know. Rebecca reached into her portfolio one final time and pulled out a thick envelope. 3 days ago, I received a call from Dr. Jennifer Park at Stanford University. They're looking for someone to head their new quantum computing initiative. The position comes with a salary that's 40% higher than what I make here, a research budget of $5 million over 3 years, and a fully equipped lab. The room was now completely silent. Rebecca could see the shock on Dr. Beck's face as he began to understand the implications. MIT has also made me an offer, Rebecca continued. So has the University of California system. Apparently my work is valued quite highly everywhere except here. She placed the envelope on the table. This letter is my formal resignation from Westfield University, effective at the end of this academic year. Dr. Beck found his voice. Rebecca, let's not be hasty. Perhaps we can work something out. Rebecca laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Work something out? Dr. Beck, you've spent weeks trying to dismantle my career because I'm pregnant. You've shown your true colors, and so have most of the people in this room. She gestured around the table. You want to know what the real tragedy is here? It's not just that you're losing me, it's that you're losing my 3 graduate students who will be transferring with me. It's that you're losing the reputation I've built for this department in the quantum computing community. It's that other talented women will hear about what happened here and choose to go elsewhere. Rebecca began gathering her papers. And you're losing the respect of every major research institution that will hear this story. Because I promise you they will hear it. Dr. Stevens finally spoke up, his voice shaky. Now wait a minute. Let's not blow this out of proportion. We were just trying to protect the department's interests. Rebecca turned to face him directly. Dr. Stevens, you were handed a research project worth over $1 million and you don't even understand the basic principles involved. Do you honestly think the National Science Foundation won't notice when the project suddenly starts producing meaningless results? She picked up her portfolio and headed toward the door, then paused and turned back to face the room. There's one more thing you should know, she said. I've been in contact with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They're very interested in this case, especially given the documentation I've provided. I've also reached out to the National Science Foundation's Office of Diversity and Inclusion. They take discrimination against grant recipients quite seriously. Dr. Beck's face went white. Rebecca, surely we can resolve this internally. You had weeks to resolve this internally, Rebecca replied. Instead, you chose to escalate it at every turn. Now you get to deal with the consequences. She walked to the door, then turned back one final time. Oh, and Dr. Stevens? You might want to start reading up on quantum entanglement and superposition. You're going to need it when the NSF asks for your progress report in 3 months. Rebecca left the conference room and walked slowly down the hallway toward her office. Behind her, she could hear the eruption of voices as the faculty meeting dissolved into chaos. Her phone was already buzzing with text messages. Word traveled fast in academic circles, and her resignation would be major news in the physics community. By the time she reached her office, Rebecca felt lighter than she had in weeks. The baby was kicking enthusiastically as if celebrating along with her. She looked around at the space that had been her professional home for 8 years. The awards on the walls, the photos with students, the bookshelves filled with physics journals. She would miss some aspects of this place. But she wouldn't miss the feeling of having to constantly prove herself to people who should have been her allies. Her child would grow up knowing that their mother had stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Rebecca's phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Foster's number. I heard through the grapevine that there was some excitement at your faculty meeting today, Dr. Foster said, amusement clear in her voice. News travels fast, Rebecca replied, settling into her chair. In academia? Are you kidding? I've already had 3 people call me asking if the rumors are true. Did you really resign in the middle of a faculty meeting? Rebecca smiled. I prefer to think of it as making a career transition with flair. Dr. Foster laughed. Rebecca, I'm proud of you. It takes courage to stand up to institutional discrimination, especially when you have so much to lose. Actually, Rebecca said, looking out her office window at the campus where she'd spent the best years of her career, I think I have more to gain than to lose. My child is going to grow up in a world where their mother refused to accept being treated as less than she was worth. That evening, Rebecca and Tom sat on their couch, pizza boxes on the coffee table and her laptop open between them. They were looking at houses in Palo Alto near Stanford, where she'd accepted the position as head of the new quantum computing initiative. It's a big change, Tom said, scrolling through photos of California neighborhoods, the biggest, Rebecca agreed. But maybe that's exactly what we need. Her phone buzzed with another text message. This one was from Alex, her graduate student. Professor, I just heard what happened. I'm transferring to Stanford with you. This is going to be amazing. Rebecca smiled and showed the message to Tom. I think, she said, our adventure is just beginning. 2 years later, Dr. Rebecca Martinez stood in front of a packed auditorium at the International Conference on Quantum Computing in Geneva, Switzerland. The baby she'd been carrying during those difficult months at Westfield University was now a toddler named Grace, who was currently back in California with Tom, probably making a mess of their kitchen while trying to help Daddy make breakfast. Rebecca's presentation that morning had been about her team's breakthrough in quantum error correction, research that had emerged from the state-of-the-art lab Stanford had built for her quantum computing initiative. The audience's response had been enthusiastic, with questions and collaboration requests from researchers around the world. But today's keynote speech was about something entirely different. When I was 8 months pregnant, Rebecca began, her voice carrying clearly through the large auditorium. My department head tried to take away my research funding because he was worried about my commitment to my work. A murmur went through the audience. Many of them knew the story by now. It had become something of a legend in the physics community, but hearing it directly from Rebecca still had impact. I'm here today not just to talk about quantum computing, but to discuss something equally important: how our field treats the brilliant minds we claim to value. Rebecca clicked to her first slide, which showed statistics about women in physics and the challenges they faced when starting families. The numbers were stark and sobering. 2 years ago, I thought my career might be over because I chose to have a child. Today, I'm leading a research team of 15 people, including 5 of the brightest graduate students I've ever worked with. We've published 12 papers in the past 18 months, filed for 3 patents, and our work has been cited over 400 times. She clicked to the next slide, showing photos of her current lab at Stanford. The equipment was cutting edge. The space was twice the size of what she'd had at Westfield. And the team of researchers working there represented some of the most promising young minds in quantum physics. But this story isn't really about me succeeding elsewhere, Rebecca continued. It's about what happened after I left, and what we can learn from it. The next slide showed a timeline of events that had unfolded at Westfield University following her resignation. The audience leaned forward, clearly interested in this part of the story. Within 6 months of my departure, the National Science Foundation pulled the quantum computing grant. Dr. Stevens, who had no background in the field, was unable to demonstrate any meaningful progress on the research objectives. Rebecca paused for effect. The grant was worth $1.2 million over 3 years. When the NSF pulled it, they also flagged Westfield University for inadequate project oversight, which affected their eligibility for future federal funding. She clicked to the next slide. But the financial impact was just the beginning. My 3 graduate students transferred with me to Stanford. 2 other promising students chose to go elsewhere rather than risk similar treatment. The department lost 5 years' worth of recruitment and training investment. The audience was completely silent now. Rebecca could see some people taking notes, while others simply stared at the screen in shock. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission investigation resulted in a formal finding of discrimination. Westfield University was required to pay a settlement and implement new policies for supporting faculty during major life events. Dr. Beck, the department head, resigned under pressure. Rebecca clicked to a new slide showing headlines from various academic publications and news outlets. The story went viral in academic circles. Physics departments around the world began reviewing their own policies. The hashtag pregnant professors started trending on academic Twitter. She gestured to the audience. How many of you work at institutions that have revised their maternity leave policies in the past 2 years? About half the hands in the auditorium went up. Rebecca nodded with satisfaction. That's the real impact of standing up to discrimination. It's not just about one person or one case. It's about changing the culture of our entire field. Rebecca clicked to her next slide, which showed photos of women physicists at various career stages: graduate students, postdocs, junior faculty, senior researchers, many of them holding babies or with children by their sides. I've received hundreds of emails from women in physics who felt inspired to speak up about their own experiences. Some shared stories of discrimination they'd faced but never reported. Others described supportive environments where they were able to thrive as both researchers and mothers. She paused to take a sip of water, gathering her thoughts for the most important part of her presentation. But here's what I want you to understand. This isn't a women's issue. This is a field issue. Physics loses brilliant minds when we create environments where people have to choose between having families and having careers. We lose diverse perspectives when we make it clear that only certain types of people are welcome. Rebecca clicked to a slide showing recent statistics about women's representation in physics. The numbers are changing, but slowly. We can accelerate that change by making our field truly inclusive. She shared specific examples of policies that had been implemented at various universities following her case: extended parental leave for both mothers and fathers, lactation rooms in physics buildings, childcare support for conferences, and mentorship programs for faculty balancing careers and families. At Stanford, our quantum computing initiative has a culture of supporting work-life integration, Rebecca said. We have flexible meeting times to accommodate school pickup schedules. We provide childcare support for conferences and research trips. We judge productivity based on results, not hours spent in the lab. She clicked to a photo of her current research team, a diverse group of men and women of various ages and backgrounds, including several who had young children. This team has been extraordinarily productive precisely because people feel supported and valued as whole human beings, not just as research machines. Rebecca's phone, sitting on the podium beside her laptop, lit up with a text message. She glanced down and smiled when she saw it was from Tom, with a photo of Grace building a tower out of blocks. "My daughter is now 2 years old," Rebecca said, showing the photo to the audience. "She loves visiting my lab, and she's already fascinated by the quantum computer. She calls it the magic box because it can do calculations that seem impossible." The audience laughed, and Rebecca could see some people wiping their eyes. "I want Grace to grow up in a world where her gender doesn't limit her choices, where having a family doesn't mean sacrificing her ambitions, and where brilliant minds are valued regardless of their personal circumstances." Rebecca clicked to her final slide, which simply showed her contact information and a quote. "Progress happens when we refuse to accept that things have to stay the way they've always been. The changes we've seen in the past 2 years prove that our field can evolve," she concluded. "But it requires all of us, not just women, not just parents, but everyone who values excellence and equity, to speak up when we see discrimination, and to actively work toward more inclusive environments." The applause started slowly but quickly, built to a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. As the audience finally settled back into their seats, the conference moderator opened the floor for questions. A young woman in the third row raised her hand. "Dr. Martinez, what advice would you give to graduate students or early career researchers who are facing similar challenges?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. "Document everything. Know your rights. Find allies who will support you. And remember that you have more power than you think. Institutions need talented researchers more than talented researchers need any single institution." An older man near the back raised his hand. "What would you say to department heads or senior faculty who might be listening?" "I'd say that supporting your faculty through major life transitions isn't just the right thing to do morally. It's good business," Rebecca replied. "The cost of losing a productive researcher and having to recruit and train a replacement far exceeds the cost of providing temporary support during parental leave." A woman in the middle section stood up. "Dr. Martinez, has anyone from Westfield University reached out to you since your resignation?" Rebecca paused, thinking about the several awkward emails she'd received over the past 2 years. "Yes, actually. Dr. Beck's replacement contacted me last year to ask if I'd be interested in returning as a visiting professor for a semester. I politely declined." The audience laughed, understanding the irony. "But I did agree to give a guest lecture there next month," Rebecca continued. "Not because I'm interested in going back, but because I want to speak directly to the current students and faculty about what inclusive excellence looks like." After the formal question period ended, Rebecca was surrounded by conference attendees wanting to continue the conversation. Young researchers shared their own experiences. Department heads asked for advice on improving their policies, and senior scientists expressed support for the changes she'd advocated. Dr. Angela Foster, who had flown in from California to attend Rebecca's presentation, made her way through the crowd. "I'm so proud of you," she said, giving Rebecca a warm hug. "You've turned a terrible experience into a catalyst for positive change across our entire field." Rebecca smiled. "It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And honestly, I'm happier now than I've ever been professionally." That evening, Rebecca video called Tom and Grace from her hotel room. Grace, now a chatty toddler, insisted on showing her mother every toy in their living room through the phone screen. "Mama, when you come home?" Grace asked, holding a stuffed quantum particle toy that one of Rebecca's graduate students had made for her. "2 more days, sweetheart," Rebecca said. "Then we'll play with your blocks and read stories." After Grace went to bed, Rebecca and Tom talked about her presentation and the response it had received. "You know," Tom said, "when all this started happening at Westfield, I wasn't sure how it would turn out. I knew you were brilliant and talented, but I worried about the professional cost of fighting back." Rebecca nodded. "I worried too, but staying quiet would have been worse. At least this way, Grace will grow up knowing her mother stood up for what was right." "And look how it turned out," Tom said. You're doing the best work of your career. You're making a difference for other women in science, and we're happier as a family than we've ever been." Rebecca looked around her hotel room, thinking about how far she'd come in just 2 years. Tomorrow she'd fly home to California, to her state-of-the-art lab and her supportive colleagues and her family. She'd continue working on research that could revolutionize computing, while also mentoring the next generation of physicists in an environment that valued both excellence and humanity. The experience at Westfield had been painful, but it had also revealed her own strength and resilience. More importantly, it had sparked changes that would benefit countless other women in science for years to come. Rebecca's phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from a graduate student at a university in Germany, thanking her for her presentation and sharing her own story of successfully navigating pregnancy during her PhD program. "I used to think I'd have to choose between having children and having a career in physics," the student wrote. "Your example showed me that I can have both, and that fighting for equality benefits everyone." Rebecca smiled as she typed back a response of encouragement and support. The ripple effects of her decision to stand up to discrimination were still spreading, creating positive change in physics departments around the world. As she prepared for bed, Rebecca thought about Grace sleeping peacefully back home in California. Her daughter would grow up in a world where women's contributions to science were valued, where having a family didn't mean sacrificing professional ambitions, and where speaking truth to power was not just possible but necessary. It had taken courage to walk away from Westfield University, but it had taken even more courage to turn that experience into a force for positive change. And as Rebecca drifted off to sleep, she felt grateful for both the challenges that had tested her resolve and the opportunities that had allowed her to transform adversity into advocacy.